Okay, we'll start. Okay, so your assignments hopefully are doing well. It's either in, or if you're slipping, it will be in soon. It's maybe a little early to talk about assignment 2, but since I kind of rearranged the course, it corresponds to what we did last class, which is a cognitive walkthrough. So since that's fresh in your mind, I'll just sort of walk through what assignment 2 is now. So in assignment 2, you're going to do a cognitive walkthrough. That's basically it for the assignment. You will do it on one of these two tools. So you can choose one of the two. One's called Ghostery and one's called EFF Privacy Badger. I would suggest doing it on Ghostery. It's more feature rich. And from a usability perspective, if you're writing a report, the more features there are, there's more stuff to talk about. The reason I put this one here is because Ghostery sometimes change their product, or what was free is now you have to pay for and things like that. So the Privacy Badger will always be free and open source. Anyway, so you're free to choose between the two of them. Just state which. And the idea isn't that you do both, or you're not trying to compare the two to each other. There's just two options there. So choose one and do the evaluation for it. So the first question will be you coming up with what you think the core tasks are. So 7 core tasks, basically just a mark for each, and then a description, so another mark, so 2 marks each. Maximum 3 sentences about each. And then from the 7 that you choose in question 1, you can take 3 of them. The 3 most important ones are the ones that you think are kind of the most prominent core tasks, and then do the actual walkthrough of the core tasks, okay? So you'll say what the core task is, you'll just go step by step, you'll say who the user is that you're modeling. Both of these tools are meant for everyone. So these aren't tech tools, they're meant for everyday users. So you should do the walkthrough from the perspective of an everyday user. And then as you go through, you can refer to the guidelines. So you'll use the same guidelines that we used in class. Again, you're free to modify them if you want, but I think you probably won't need to modify them. And yeah, basically you'll just say what you see, and if it looks really good, say on G2, G3, whatever, you'll say it. If it looks bad, you'll say there's an issue here, I think, with G7. You don't have to say something about all 8 of them at every step, okay? So if you're not saying anything, then I'm just assuming that it's okay on that step, okay? All right, and so yeah, so you'll do the write-up for just the 3 core tasks, and then limit yourself to 1 page per core task. And if you have a lot of pictures or things like that, you can extend by an extra page. But I want things like fairly tight because it's a lot of work for the TA to mark. Okay, is there any questions that leap to mind? Okay, so again, this isn't due for a month, but anyways, it's actually good. It's great to do it if you can do it today. Like, there's nothing you're waiting for in the course in order to do it better. And if you do it sooner, then the semester is just going to get busier and busier, right? Midterms, finals, projects, and all that type of stuff. And so, anyways, yeah.
This assignment is completely related to the last lecture?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so the cognitive walkthrough that we did in class of TOR, you're doing that same methodology. Instead of doing it on TOR, you're going to do it on one of these 2 tools.
Okay. So, sorry, I'm
Yeah.
misunderstanding. The last class TOR was there. I was thinking that we will do the same in the TOR, but right now we are doing for this.
Yeah, so the software will change.
Okay,
So
got it.
the whole process that we did, and like going back to the guidelines and stuff, that's what's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, so no TOR, you'll either do Ghostery or EFF, but you'll do that same process that we did. Yeah. Okay, and then just like we had to learn a bit about TOR before we could evaluate it, you should, part of the project, there's no marks with it, but like you'll be forced to do it in order to do a good usability evaluation, is learning a bit about what these tools do, how, like, what are they exposing? So they're related to tracking through cookies, basically. So whatever you want to learn about those areas, you can learn. Again, things like ChatGPT are your friend. You can ask it questions and get it to explain what cookies are or whatever to you. We will talk about cookies at one point in the course, but it won't. This will be due before we ever talk about cookies. Okay, other questions? All right, look it over. Get started if you can. If you have more questions in the coming weeks, you have lots of time to ask them. Okay, before we jump in the lectures, are any other questions about anything? I was sent the tentative final exam schedule. So tentatively, our exam will be, it'll be on Friday, but it will be 2 weeks after our last class. So again, this is tentative, but so our last class is the 11th. The first Friday after is a holiday. It's Good Friday. So I think that's why. So then tentatively it's scheduled for the 25th. But yeah. Anyways, it could get changed for a small number of reasons, but probably most years they don't change it. Usually the tentative is the final. It's just if a student maybe had like 3 exams in the same day or something like that, that's usually the only reason it gets changed. Okay. Any other questions? No. Okay, so for today, we're going to kind of go back to high-level evaluation methodologies. Sorry, this is in the middle. And I'm going to talk about attack trees. So I'll put this slide up first. Okay, so we saw in the very first lecture of the course, we saw STRIDE. STRIDE is a high-level methodology. You tend to use it on one sort of solution. So there's one, like you are evaluating a password manager, so then you can use STRIDE on that. Okay, evaluation frameworks involve comparing multiple solutions to each other, usually along the lines of security, deployability, and usability. And then we took a kind of detour on usability, and we went through all the different evaluations for usability that are a little more detailed than what you would do in an evaluation framework. And so now we're going to come back to the third kind of high-level methodology. So high-level means, again, that you can apply it to software, to hardware. You can do evaluation frameworks or STRIDE on hardware. You can do it on processes or procedures. It doesn't have to be software. So they're pretty general. This one's called an attack tree, and it's going to be a little narrower than both of the ones that we saw. So evaluation framework, you're comparing multiple solutions. STRIDE, you're comparing one solution, but you're looking at every possible attack you can think of against that one solution. With an attack tree, we're going to narrow it to one attack on one system. Okay, so the goal of it is we're going to define something an adversary might want to do to defeat a system, and then we're basically going to brainstorm every possible way they could get away with that attack. Okay, so and then we'll organize it sort of into a tree. All right, and if there's 2 or 3 things that an adversary might want to do to break your system, then you'll have 2 or 3 attack trees. So you'll have an attack tree for each attack against the system. Okay, so the idea of an attack tree is to think of all the possible ways of breaking one particular security feature that your solution should have. And when we use the term attack, sometimes we distinguish between attack and threat. So a threat is like the possibility of an attack. An attack is like something that actually happened. Here we actually care more about threats than attacks. So even if it's sort of a theoretical thing that might work, you can include it in an attack tree. So technically it should be called a threat tree, just everyone calls them attack trees. But it doesn't strictly have to be something that like historically like someone broke the system in a particular way. The attack tree will develop in class, so will be based on actual attacks that happened. But you can think of it as a threat tree. In order to come up with the possible attacks, you can use strides. So, you can combine these methodologies with each other, and you'll see as we go through the attack tree, the example that we do, you'll see different categories of attacks. You're going to see a lot of spoofing attacks. You'll see tampering attacks. You'll see escalation of privilege, information disclosure, the whole bit. Attack trees are pretty flexible. So if you don't know a lot about what you're doing the security analysis on, you can still sort of do an okay attack tree. And if you know a lot about it, then your attack tree can just become more and more detailed. So we're going to do a very detailed attack tree. It's so detailed that we're going to spend 3 lectures. So this week, next week, and the week after on just doing one attack tree on one particular protocol. So that's sort of an extreme end in terms of detail. But it shows you that even though this is a high-level methodology, you can push it towards low-level thinking as well if you want a lot of low-level detail. Because domain knowledge is required, a lot of the lectures will also be about teaching you the protocol that we're studying. So I'll sort of show you how it works, and then we'll think about the attacks, then we'll put them in the tree. Then we'll look at a different aspect of the protocol, we'll put the attacks in the tree, etc. Okay, so the attack tree itself is not that sophisticated. Basically, it's just sort of a diagram that shows all the attacks. It's organized in a tree. So a tree has like a root, and then it has branches, and then eventually the branches end somewhere, and that's called a leaf. Okay? So the center of the graph, the root node, will be the goal of the adversary. So the adversary has a particular goal. And then the leaves of the tree will be the actual attacks. And then going along a branch from the root to the leaf will kind of be like the story of the attack, how you sort of got there. And there may be attacks that are related to each other. So they're almost the same attack, but they differ right at the end. They'll be kind of along the same branch. There might be 2 attacks that are completely different from each other. They'll be on completely different branches. And if you traverse from the root to the leaf, it should tell the story of the attack. So this slide will make more sense in a second when we look at an actual example. One tip before we do a small example is, you'll see it, but I'll just say it. The adversary has a goal, that's your root node. So your first job is to think of, you guys start filling in the tree from the first node. And so what you do is you just ask yourself, well, what stops the adversary from achieving their goal? There must be some reason why they can't just straight up just do it, right? If they can, then it's a pretty simple attack tree. So you can write that down as the next node. So it could be, there's this defense mechanism that prevents them from doing it. And then the goal of the adversary now is to defeat that defense mechanism, okay? So they'll break the system if they can break this defense mechanism. Why can't they just break that defense mechanism? Well, maybe there's a sort of subpart of that defense mechanism. So now their goal is to break the subpart of that defense mechanism. And eventually, if they're able to break into something that's a component of a bigger thing, that's a component of a bigger thing, it can let them into the whole system. Okay? So I'll give you an example that will clarify it. Okay, so this is a parking lot, and this is a paid parking lot. So what that means is I go in, I park, and when I leave, I have to pay. Okay, usually based on how much time I spent. So if I park for 10 minutes, maybe I can get it for free. If I park for an hour, I'm going to pay something. If I park there for 8 hours, I'm going to pay $25 if it's downtown Montreal. Okay, Concordia has these parking lots. There's all sorts of them. All right, so there are security mechanisms in here, which is basically you're supposed to pay. Okay, it should not be easy for you to get out of this parking lot without paying. Does that mean it's impossible? No, there's probably ways of doing it. Okay, so let's do an attack tree where we think about all the possible ways that you could leave a parking lot without actually paying. Does anyone have any ideas?
Follow the follower.
Okay, so one thing you can do is You can do tailgating, essentially. So let's say someone else is leaving the parking lot, and sometimes, you know, you have a car that has a boat on the end of it or a trailer or things like that. That doesn't really look any different to whatever sensors are at play than two cars going, as long as they're close, right? So one person starts leaving, the arm goes up, and then someone else comes in behind. Okay, so that's good. So that's a tailgating attack. So that's one way of getting out without pain. Any other ways?
Drive through the gate.
Okay, so you could break it, right? You could just drive through the gates. So is that physically going to stop a car? That thing that you're looking at? I mean, they're designed in different ways. Probably not, right? So you probably could just drive through it. Say it again.
Have someone lift it up for you?
Okay, so can someone lift it up without pain? So if you put your ticket and it's paid, it will lift up. Is there anyone else in the world that can get that thing to lift?
Hack the system.
Okay, so there could be some breach. So there is electronics that control it. If you're able to breach the electronics, then you could get the arm to lift. Is there anyone else that could open it?
Friend.
A friend, your friend? Probably is not if you can't open it, they probably couldn't. But
The guy at the
Inner.
gate.
okay, so usually there's a gate, an attendant. Usually they have a button, maybe in a booth or something like that. So you could break into the booth, push the button, right? If they're there, you could try and get them to open it. How could you get them to open it? Okay.
Use stolen cars.
Okay, let me come back to that one. Just to get the attendant to open it, you could bribe them, coerce them. You could tell them a story about why you need out, and maybe they'll take sympathy on you. Yeah, if you could befriend them, so that's kind of like bribery. You could, usually they have a key, like a physical key. All you could do is just get a picture of the key. Some security people will have their like keys hanging off their belt, right? If you can get a picture of it, you can 3D print the exact key. Then you could just unlock it yourself. Okay, someone said a stolen credit card. So another way of defeating it. So again, let me go back to the tip here. What stops you from just driving out? So the answer is like the arm, right? The arm is the thing that drives out, okay? And the arm will go up if you pay, yeah? So you can say, well, the arm is stopping me. So we talked a lot of ways of defeating the arm. You could drive through the arm. You could tailgate someone going through the arm. You could you could get the person who can move the arm up, right? So that's sort of like one component. And then you can say, okay, well, you know, what's stopping me from just getting the arm to open? Well, you didn't pay, right? And then you could say, okay, well, what are all the ways of making it think I paid even though I didn't pay? So that would be kind of a different branch of the tree. So there's the branch of the tree where you're defeating the arm, and there's the branch of the tree where you're defeating the payment system. Okay? How can I defeat the payment system? So I could use a stolen credit card, counterfeit. I could hack the payment system, that kind of thing. So there's a whole branch there. So that's fine. Is there any other way I can trick it in terms of the payment itself?
Inner help. The company's inner help.
Yeah. So then, and then what?
I mean, a friend in the company, they can open it for you.
Yeah. So that goes back to the attendant, right? So like the person who can open it could open it. So you could go to them and say, I paid, right? And would they be able to tell whether you paid or not? Right? So say again?
Use Flipper Zero.
In what's, how to help?
So scan the gate pass or something.
Okay, so if there's, okay, there might be people that have like a season's pass or something like that. And if that's an RFID based system, if you're able to scan that card, now you have their season pass. So that's another way of getting in. So Flipper Zero would be one tool that you could use to scan that card.
You could have somebody, like a friend or whatever, drive up and get a new ticket to gain entry, but hand it over to you and drive away or whatever, so you have blank ticket as if you just went in and used that.
Okay, good. Let's explore this idea. So if I go, let's say I go in the parking lot, it's full, and I leave. Do I have to pay? Usually not, right? And how's that enforced? Time. So usually it's as long as you're out in 10 minutes, doesn't count. Okay? So first off, just before we have friends and all of that stuff, what if I just walk up, like you get the ticket when you go in, right? So why don't I just walk up to the machine, take a new ticket out, go to my car, and then leave, and I have a new ticket that's 10 minutes old, then I can get out for free. Yeah?
Yeah, usually there's a sensor, like there has to be a car or like a weight sensor or something so that it gives you the key. I don't know if there's systems there where you can do it manually or operate it or whatever, but usually you have to have a weight or something there to.
Okay, agreed. So that's too simple of an attack. Okay, so there are defense mechanisms against it. So yeah, usually there's some sort of weight sensor or something like that. So if it's not a car that's sitting there, then it's not going to spit out a new ticket. Otherwise, it's too easy to just do that. Okay, so now, okay, we have an attack. We want to get out, but the arm is in our way. We know if we pay, the arm will raise, but we don't want to pay. We know that if we get a new ticket, the arm will lift for us without paying, okay? But we can't get a new ticket because there's this weight sensor. So now our attack is, can we attack the weight sensor? If we can attack the weight sensor, right, then we get the new ticket, and the new ticket will open the arm, and when the arm's open, then we drive off without paying, okay? So you see how the attack, like, sort of trickles down, okay? How do we defeat the weight sensor? Get 10 of your friends, right? If you all stand there and one person pushes it, then it's going to think there's a car there. Maybe, depending on your friends. Maybe you need more or less. But that could be one way of doing it, right? You could have someone who's on the outside, they pull up as if they're going to drive in. They get the ticket, then they just back off, right? They give you the ticket, and then you get out for free. Or you can do an elaborate kind of chaining attack where you wait for someone else to come in, and you swap tickets with them. So you have your old ticket, which is like the daily maximum $25, right? So you give it to them, which is a bad deal for them, but we'll get to that in a second. They give you the brand new ticket that they just got. You leave, okay? Now they're stuck with the $25 ticket, right? But they can do the same trick when they want to leave. So when they want to leave, they wait for someone to pull in, then they swap tickets with them. They get the new ticket and they leave. Right? Now the new person's holding a $25 ticket, but they can swap with the next person that comes in when they want to leave. Okay? Eventually, maybe somebody will have to pay $25, but you could have 5, 10, 100 people park for free, and just one person pays the $25. Right? You could split that cost amongst everyone. Or if people are continually going in and out all day, right, which is like a lot of parking lots, then you could run that chain forever. Okay, anything else anyone can think of?
Take down Hydra.
Okay, so what happens in like a failure mode? Let's say there's some sort of incident, like say the hydro goes out. Is it like, well, you can't leave the parking garage? You can't pay now because the payment system's down. So sorry, you're stuck here. Would that happen? So not usually, right? Most parking garages are going to just open. They can't keep you there. It's a fire hazard, safety hazard. It's, limiting your personal freedoms and things like that. And so in that case, they're just going to open it. Okay. So if you could trigger any sort of fault. Now, this is an important concept that we'll see probably 2-3 times. When you have a security system and there's a failure, you have to decide what you're going to do in terms of, are you going to lift the security restriction or are you going to keep the security restriction? So in systems where we lift it if there's a fault, we call it permit override. Okay, so you're permitted, the override in the failure condition is permission. And if it remains closed, if there's some sort of failure, then we say it's deny override. Okay, and so any system, any security system that has permit override then if you can do some sort of availability attack, some sort of denial of service attack, D from Stride, right? Then it's going to fail, and it's going to fail open. And then the security is lifted, and then you can just go in, okay? So there's a lot of fail open systems. Like a lot of malware and things like that, they try and get you to boot into safe mode. Okay, that's kind of like a failure mode, and it turns off a lot of security stuff, tools that you might have running and things like that, okay? So that's like sort of a fail open kind of system. And yeah, we'll see a couple more examples, just even with our attack tree, you'll see a couple, and then we'll see a couple later in the course as well. Okay, so I think we did a pretty good job, but we'll just go, I have some of the tree in the slides. So yeah, so the goal is to leave the parking garage without pain. So that's the root node. And then to do the first like kind of set of nodes, you can just ask yourself like what kind of stops you. And so there's this robotic arm. Well, if we can evade it, then that would be like a set of attacks. You have to pay. So if we could evade pain, that would be another set of attacks. Attack trees are like evaluation frameworks in the sense that everyone will do them slightly different. So this isn't the right attack tree. This isn't the only attack tree for this type of attack, okay? So like where you put nodes exactly will differ a bit from student to student, and that's okay. There's no like strict scientific way to say how to do it, but you do want to kind of cluster similar attacks with each other. Okay, so let's start with the evade robotic arm. So our goal is to leave the parking garage without pain. We're going to evade the robotic arm. Then we can think about, well, how can we get around this robotic arm? Okay, so one thing is physically we could just drive through it. So that was mentioned. You could also drive around it. So here's a picture. Here's a picture of someone who just drove through, right? And here's my favorite like parking garage, right? So there's the arm is here. And I think a lot of people are driving around this. Is there any hint as to why? So like you can see all the paths just going around it. Yeah. You can tailgate another car. You could trigger a power outage. So this is a permit override or fail open. Those are two terms that mean the same thing. There's an attendee there, so you could do some sort of social engineering. You could grab their key. Basically, from a picture, you can do a 3D print, and then that 3D printed key should open whatever locks that you need to. So this isn't every possible attack, but it's some of them, just to give you a flavor of what an attack tree looks like. And then in terms of the payment, so there's two components to the payment. There's the money you put in, and then there's the ticket that you hold. So in terms of the money, it could be counterfeit, or you could do some sort of repudiation thing where you claim to have paid and maybe they can't prove that you didn't. The ticket itself, you could try to tamper with it. So sometimes it has like barcodes, so I don't know what's on there. Maybe you could write the fact that you paid into that barcode and then it would accept it. I'm sure they're not like high security tickets. Another thing that's happened to me accidentally is one time I parked here at Concordia and I folded the ticket and put it in my pocket, or somehow it got folded, and now it won't scan. So then I just went to the person and said, it doesn't scan. I want to pay, but I can't pay because it doesn't scan. And they just said, go ahead. They opened the door for me, kind of thing, right? So you could purposely, ruin your ticket. But some attacks too, you got to think about the consequences of the attack. So a good attack from the attacker's perspective is one that you could repeat, right? The thing about folding tickets, right? You could probably repeat it once, and then the second time they'd be like, I remember you. I'm not going to let you out. And I'm just going to drive through the parking arm. That not only could you not repeat it, but you could go to jail, and then you won't be able to park for a year or whatever, right? And so the consequences also change in terms of the different attacks. But anyways, you could ruin it. And then we talked about if you can get a fresh ticket, one that's new, then you don't have to pay. But there's this weight sensor, so you could have a lot of friends. You could get a ticket with a car and back away, or you could do this kind of chaining attack. Okay, so this is sort of the whole tree. Okay, so as you can see, I'll do it one last time. You can see that it's sort of defense, defeat the defense, defeat the defense, and then eventually you end up at an attack. And there's sort of a story to be told as you go from the root node to a leaf node. So if we go to lots of friends here, our goal is to leave the garage without paying. We're going to do that by evading the payment. We're going to do that somehow with our ticket. And specifically, we're going to get a fresh ticket. But now we have this weight sensor, so we can't just get a fresh ticket, right? So now I'm going to get a lot of friends. And so because I have a lot of friends standing on the wait, then I can get a fresh ticket. And because the fresh ticket is free, I don't have to pay, and then I can leave the garage without paying. Okay, so this is an attack tree. And so, yeah, again, it's sort of an art as opposed to a science. Everyone would do their attack tree slightly different. But the idea of the attack tree is to try and get you to think through all the possible attacks. It's meant to get you to think about attack, defense. And it's also good at getting you to think of related attacks. So sometimes you'll be like in some part of the tree, and then you'll think about like, oh, there's actually 3 attacks to do that particular step as opposed to just one. Maybe you know about the one, but once you put in the tree, you sort of explore the areas that are neighboring it, and then you might discover other attacks that are similar but slightly different. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do another big example of an attack tree. And we're going to do it on breaking a protocol called HTTPS. So I'm going to tell you a bit about HTTPS before we start talking about the attack tree itself. And like I said, we'll spend 3 lectures on it. So it's a pretty involved protocol. The protocol itself, I'm not going to give you all the details of it, but the number of ways of attacking this protocol are large, probably bigger than you might think. Okay, so what's HTTPS? So HTTPS is a way of fetching a website that's encrypted, more or less. Okay, so you've probably seen it before. You go to a website like Concordia, and instead of it being http://Concordia, it's https://concordia.ca. So that means you fetched it over HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. So HTTP is the language, the network protocol, basically for passing around like HTML files and other files for the web. It's basically just for web stuff, and you pass it around. And then the S in HTTPS adds SSL or TLS, or sometimes it stands for secure, and that's going to be a library that has a bunch of cryptography. Okay, and so the cryptography is going to give you certain security protections that are layered on top of HTTP. So SSL or TLS is the S part, the secure part. It was originally called SSL. It was standardized by Netscape in the 1995, I think IBM Netscape. And the first version never made it publicly. It was sort of discussed within the organization, and then they launched the first version of it, which was SSL 2.0, and Netscape, I think, was the first internet browser that implemented it. Then there's been multiple versions, so SSL 3.0. Then there was an organization that kind of took over internet standards called the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force. And when they took over this library from Netscape and IBM, they changed the name. So they changed it from Secure Session Layer to Transport Layer Security, or TLS. And so currently we're on TLS version 1.3. There will be a TLS 1.4 at some point in the future. If you've studied networking, you might be familiar with something called the OSI model. And so you might recognize words like transport and session. So SSL has the word session in it. It kind of implies that it would be at the session layer of that model. And then transport layer security puts it lower at the transport layer, which is actually where it should be. So that's another motivation behind the name change. But anyways. Okay, so how do you know that you're on a website that is loaded over HTTPS as opposed to HTTP? And so there's 2 indications to you. They might mean slightly different things. They might mean the same thing. We'll discover that as we go. But for now, the first indication is that there's a lock. Okay, and the second indication is if you actually look at the URL, you'll see that the S is there. Okay, so it's HTTPS://. So both of these are loaded over HTTPS. The lock gives you the impression of security, but what exactly security means, right, that we have to define. But right now we have what we call a secure connection to google.com. Okay, how do you end up on an HTTPS website? So how do you get there in the first place? So there's a couple different ways. The first is you could explicitly ask for it. So if you want to go to google.com and you take the time to type out HTTPS://google.com, then you'll at least ask, your browser will ask for the HTTPS version, okay? If websites are free to implement it or not, okay? That's another thing that you should understand. So every website, can decide, I'm going to have an HTTP version, I'm going to have an HTTPS version, or I might have both. Or I might redirect you from one to the other. There's a couple different options. Okay, so you can type it in yourself. And the worst case is it doesn't exist, then you'll just get an error. Then you can try the HTTP version. Okay, now most of us aren't typing URLs in manually, right? Usually we're following links. We're clicking on things. And so whether we end up on HTTPS or not, it depends on where we followed the link from. So if I'm on Google's search results page, right? Google has a choice when they give me the link to some other like Concordia, they can choose whether that's a link to HTTPS Concordia or if it's a link to HTTP. Okay? So I don't control that. I just click the link, and the person who embedded the link, they made that choice for me. Okay? All right, so you can click on a link, and the website with the link embedded it is the one that chooses to send you to HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. Now, probably the most popular website that you would click on a link from would be a search engine. Okay, you're looking for something, you Google it. So how does Google themselves figure out whether they should link you to the HTTPS or the HTTP version? The answer is, well, they crawl the web. And when they crawl the web, they try both. And now if they see that you have an HTTPS version, by default, they'll send you there. Okay, so you'll always go to the secure version. If their bots have crawled the website and they see that there's a secure version there, they're going to send you to the secure version. It wasn't that way always. It used to be that they would kind of decide, it used to be considered that HTTPS, that because there's a bunch of encryption involved that we'll get to, that there was a kind of a performance hit if you use HTTPS. So if you want to go somewhere, you want to go there as fast as possible and put the least stress on the server, then you would do it over HTTP because they wouldn't have to do any encryption. If you do over HTTPS, everything's getting encrypted. Okay? And so someone has to do that encryption, your browser has to do the decryption. And so for a while, it was thought that, well, we should save HTTPS for like really security sensitive things, and then for everything else we should do over HTTP because it's more efficient. But now encryption is so fast. There's hardware support for encryption. Your processor can do it in one clock cycle, and so it's not even like really a performance issue anymore. And so now security is the default. So if there's an HTTPS version, then we go with that. And so everyone wants us to move to a web where every website is HTTPS. There's no HTTP anymore. And browsers have started to change how they communicate it along those lines, but we'll get there in a bit. Okay, another thing that might happen that's kind of fancy is that your browser itself might know that certain websites are loaded over HTTPS. So for example, if I'm on Safari and I just type some thing up here, like not a URL, if I just type a search term, right, and I click enter, it automatically redirects me to Google. It's going to send me to the secure version of Google, and it knows that Google is always secure. Okay. Some browsers, for example, let's say I'm using Chrome. Chrome is from Google, right? So Chrome actually knows Google servers It knows all the details about the secure connection to Google. And so it's just hard-coded into the browser. And if you were ever able to get to a non-HTTP version of Google, Chrome would throw a fit about it because it's smart enough to know that Google should never be served over it. You yourself, if you run a website, you could start telling people's browsers about your website and the fact that you only run over HTTPS. So this is called a pin. You can't tell it to them ahead of time unless if you're a major corporation, then you could go to the browsers and tell them all about it. But what you could do is the first time someone visits you, then you have the option of sending down what's called a header, and you basically tell their browser to pin it. So you come to my website for the first time, I say, hey, I'm running HTTPS. By the way, I want you to remember for 2 years that I always run HTTPS. I will never run HTTP. Okay? And so don't ever come back to me over HTTP. All right? And your browser will remember that for 2 years or whatever, and then it will renew it. So that's okay. So this is actually sort of a nice security principle. In order for me to set that pin, you do have to come to me the first time. Okay? And if you come to me and there's an adversary between us, right? The adversary can basically stop that pin from getting set. Okay? So what we assume is that if you can connect to me once correctly, then I can protect all of your future connections. But if you get compromised on the first time that you contact me, then the adversary can compromise all your future communications. Okay? So we don't like that property. We want you to be able to connect to me and it to be secure. Okay? So we don't like the fact that you have to assume that the first time you talk to someone, there's no adversary there. We want you to be able to talk to them even if there's an adversary there from the very beginning. Okay? But a lot of systems have this property. It's so much so that it has a name, which is TOFU or trust on first use. So trust on first use means that you assume that you can talk to the person at least once without an adversary present. Then if an adversary comes by later, you can protect against that adversary. The last thing you could do is you could redirect from HTTP. So maybe you type in google.com. It sends a request over HTTP. Google says, oh, I do HTTPS now, so it sends you back a redirect, okay? And then you connect over HTTPS. The only problem with this is that if there's an adversary in the middle, they can stop that redirection from happening, okay? So it's not really a secure way of doing it, but it is a sort of convenient way of doing it. Okay, so let's think about what HTTPS actually does, okay? What an HTTPS does is where did it come from in the first place? So the reason it came to be was that it basically came around the same time as e-commerce. Okay, people buying stuff online. And for a long time, we thought we would have digital cash, and there's all these crazy ideas about how you might buy things online. And eventually people settled on, you'll just use your credit card. Okay, you'll type your credit card number in, you'll send it from your computer to the merchant. So the merchant now has your credit card details. Technically, they could buy anything on your credit card. Now it's so natural, we don't think twice about it. But that was the thinking back then. And by the way, if there's anyone in the middle, they also know your credit card number now, and they could start buying stuff for you with your credit card. Okay? Are there people in the middle? Absolutely. Okay? So if I'm here at Concordia is in the middle, right? I don't even know the router that I'm connected to. I know I'm connected to something called Concordia University. You could put up a router that has the SSID Concordia University, and maybe I'll connect to your router. Now you're in the middle of my conversation, okay? Your ISP is in the middle of your conversation. Then there's a whole bunch of backbone computers, right? Like Bell's networks and things like that. And then everything on the server that you're connecting to is in the middle too. So if I'm connecting to Concordia's ISP, or anyone that's local to the server, they're also in the middle. Okay? So there's lots of people in the middle of connections. And we'll talk a bit about how you can get yourself in the middle of connections if you want to under certain conditions, but we'll circle back to that. The main point is that you should always assume that someone's in the middle. Okay? So then we said, well, we can't be sending our credit card over a network that's not secure. So what if we use encryption And what we can do is build kind of like a secure tunnel between the user and the server. And then it doesn't matter if someone's in the middle. Okay, that's the point. There's still someone in the middle. We didn't get rid of the person in the middle. All we did is we said it doesn't matter anymore because the information's going in a tunnel. And they're outside of the tunnel, so they can't see it. Okay? And so now we use it for credit cards. We use it for passwords. We use it for cookies. We use it for all sorts of stuff. And we just use it for anything. You're on a website and you don't want people to know what you're looking at. You just throw it through a tunnel. Anyways, again, the setting up a tunnel is basically free in terms of computational power at this point. Okay, so what are the properties that we want from this tunnel? So if you had to tell me what does a tunnel do? What does it actually offer in terms of security? Just at a high level, like what is it doing? So it's doing encryption, that's how it's doing, and then what is it that encryption itself does? Okay, so those are different things, but let's start with the encryption first. Okay, not authentication.
Basically, what's been exchanged between the two parties is only seen by the two parties.
Okay, so it's like a secrecy thing. Like there's secrets that are being exchanged. It gives you confidentiality. In terms of Stride, it gives you, well, Stride is the opposite, but it protects against information disclosure. In CIA, it would be confidentiality. Okay, so yeah, so it gives you a secret. The tunnel, basically, you can pass secrets and no one can read them. Okay, all right. So this is called message confidentiality. You can't read data even if you're in the middle. Okay, some people had other ideas of things that it might provide. Sorry, okay, so what does that mean?
It cannot be modified by the middle.
Okay, so the next thing is, first off, I should say that a lot of people just think of SSL as confidentiality. You think encryption and you think, okay, secrets stay secret and that's it. But there is more to it than that. And it's important that you have these other properties as well. So the next thing is integrity. So integrity basically says if there's someone in the middle, they can change the data. Okay? They're in the middle, the data is going by, they can flip the bits or exchange the bytes, they can do whatever they want. Okay? And so what we want is a property that basically says we can't stop them from changing it, but what we could do is we could detect it. So if I receive a packet, I should be able to figure out whether it was tampered with or not. Okay? So that's what message integrity is modifications to the data are detectable. Now you might ask a really key question, which is, let's say you have the first and not the second. So you have confidentiality. So that means it's not like a physical tunnel where you can't see the data. It's more like the messages are scrambled up. So you can still see them, but they're kind of like noise. Don't you have integrity by default anyways? If you can't read it and it's all scrambled up and messy, there's no way you could change it. I mean, you could just do random changes, but like there's no way you could meaningfully change it if you can't even read it, right? So that's pretty intuitive, right? So I would agree with you at first glance that the answer should be right. But if you go and take 6110, right, you'll learn that if you look at the details of how encryption works, it is actually possible to blindly change things even though you don't know what you're doing in some cases, okay? So it depends on the mode of encryption that you use, yeah. So there is modes of encryption that just have confidentiality that don't have integrity. And some of them were even present in SSL or TLS, but they're gone now. But they were there, at certain points. And there's some attacks that are based on that type of thing. Okay. Now I'm not going to go through the details of how that works. You'll take a crypto course at some point. Like a simple example would be it's not used in this context in SSL, but there's an encryption scheme, probably the most famous, called RSA. And so let's say that I have your salary and I'm sending it in an RSA encryption. If you take that ciphertext, the encrypted version, it's all messed up. You have no idea what the salary is. But if you multiply it by the number 2 and send it, when the person decrypts it, they're going to get the plain text multiplied by the number 2. So they're going to get your salary, but it's now doubled because if you multiply a 2 into the ciphertext, it goes into the plaintext and it doubles the plaintext. Okay, so that's we call that malleability, where you can make meaningful changes to ciphertext even though you have no idea what the message is that's encrypted. And so there's a whole bunch of things related to that. But anyways, we do protect against it now. We have modes of operation that protect against it. Yeah.
How does this fit to the attack too? Because I mean, that's the first question. The second is it possible to have more than one root or attack too? Because essentially they're trying to do an ethical exploitation of the system to know where the vulnerability is in the system, right? Essentially. So now how does this, because HTTPS is more like, of course, like a very specific protocol, which uses a bunch of encryption and all the like. So how does it fit into the attack?
Okay. Sure. So again, so attack tree is one attack on one system. So if we do an attack tree for HTTPS, we're actually not doing an attack tree for HTTPS. We're going to do an attack tree for one attack on HTTPS. Yeah? And so your question was, if there's multiple attacks, which there clearly are, right? There's some on confidentiality, some on integrity. Do we need multiple attack trees? And the answer is yes. So if we wanted to do an attack tree for HTTPS, it would actually be a whole bunch of attack trees where we attack every section. What we're going to do in the class, it will come up in a couple slides, is we're only going to do the first thing. We're going to break confidentiality and that's it. So we're going to limit ourselves. But it's going to turn out that if we can break some of the other things, then it could lead to us breaking confidentiality. So you'll see a bit of all of them anyways, but our attack goal, that root node, will just be breaking confidentiality. Yeah, so there'll be one root node, which is one attack, which is just the confidentiality, but there's more to attacking HTTPS than what we're going to do in our one attack tree. Yeah, okay. All right, any other properties? So someone shouted out one earlier.
The tunnel establishment too, because you have to know that you're actually talking with Concordia.
Okay. So the last property we need is called server authentication. And this is one that's easy to skip, or it's easy to maybe not see why it's so important. But think of it from Alice's perspective. Alice is sending data into this tunnel. Data is coming back out of the tunnel. Okay, so that's fine. She knows the tunnel is super secure, right? It's got confidentiality, it's got integrity, it's bulletproof. Okay, but what she doesn't know is where's the tunnel end, right? When it leaves her computer, it's in the tunnel, right? But maybe the tunnel ends before it even leaves her computer. Maybe the tunnel ends at the Wi-Fi router. Maybe the tunnel goes off to the adversary who's on the other side of the world, but it ends at the adversary and it doesn't end at concordia.ca. Okay? So a tunnel is only as good as if you know where it ends. If it goes directly to the adversary, then you're sending all your data to the adversary super secure, right? But that doesn't mean anything because you're sending it straight to the adversary. Okay? So this whole thing does not work if you can't decide where the tunnel ends. Okay? So that's going to be like an important component. And I haven't told you how HTTPS figures this out, but we'll get there eventually. So say again, loud.
Essentially, because even a tunnel, you can sniff a tunnel. The most important thing is that the encryption level that the tunnel uses, because apparently you can sniff a packet or even an encryption. The only important thing is that if you cannot decrypt the message, that's the most important thing. Because even as private as it is, you can only sniff the packet.
Yeah, but the question is who can sniff it along the wire?
It's going to a communication network. I mean, it's on the internet, it's outside, so I can sniff the packet or the information. Or I mean, if I can decrypt the information on the packet, that should be important.
Yeah. So how do you make it so that the person that you're sending it to is the only person who can decrypt it?
Yeah, because essentially it's a chain. You must have the encryption key or the decryption key, rather, because it's a chain.
Okay. So then how do you get the encryption key?
Like you said, the tunnel is secure. There's an encryption level going on within the tunnel.
Okay, but you don't have a tunnel until you have the encryption key.
Essentially, but they both work hand in hand. That's what I mean. And what I'm saying is that should we be concerned about where the tunnel starts or ends or the information?
So you have to be concerned about all of it. But what I'm trying to say is that where the tunnel starts and ends is as important as these other ones, right? Like if you have no control over where the tunnel ends, if the adversary can choose where the tunnel ends, you might as well not even use encryption because you're just sending the messages straight to the adversary anyways. Yeah? But your ideas about the keys are right. There's some questions I have for you later, and we'll ask them because it sounds easy, but it's harder than it sounds. Yeah. Yes?
There can be a third-party service which makes sure that the starting point and the end point is like verified. Like we have some services for the SSL.
Okay.
These
So
services can make sure.
save that idea we'll talk about the tunnel, and we'll talk about whether that idea works or not. Yeah. But it's a good idea. So you could have, we call that a key directory, basically. Yeah.
One question is, what if the user ends this connection and the man in the middle to take over the connection? Then I think the authentication is just for the server, not for the user.
Yeah, so if the tunnel ends at the man in the middle, then the man in the middle sees everything, and the man in the middle can impersonate the user.
Yeah, take over the user's role and continue to access the Concordia.
Exactly, yeah. So if the tunnel ends here, then you see the user's password, and once you have their password, you can log in as them anytime you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the authentication is not it's not the whole level. It's just for the user to know the server is.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. Yeah, so again, we'll talk about this. For historical reasons, just of interest, when HTTPS was originally designed, it was designed with the feature of what we call dual authentication, meaning client authentication and server. So the user knows that they're visiting Concordia, and Concordia over at HTTPS, just by virtue of using HTTPS, they also authenticate the user, okay? And in a world like that, there's no username, accounts, or passwords. You just type in HTTPS, like say Google, let's do Gmail. So you type in HTTPS mail.google.com, you press enter, a split second later, you're in your inbox with the lock, and something on your computer proved who you were to Google at the same time that Google is proving who they are to you. Yeah? So that's dual factor authentication, no logins or anything like that. Yeah? So that's one world that we could have lived in. For a variety of reasons, we didn't go that way. And so now we just do one-way authentication. So Alice makes sure that she's on Concordia's website, but Concordia has no idea who Alice is. And if Concordia wants to figure out who Alice is, it makes Alice log in with a username password. Yeah?
Yeah, it's just this protocol is for this function, and maybe others is not.
Yep. Yeah, so there's lots of encrypted tunnels in the world. So there's SSH, there's HTTPS, VPN, right? Like there's lots of things that will give you tunnels. And this is specifically for you doing web stuff, basically, like passing around HTML documents and JavaScript and that kind of stuff, web stuff, yeah. But it's still a pretty versatile protocol, and it's used in a lot of things. And the crypto that's used underneath, the SSL TLS, you could use that crypto in other protocols other than HTTPS. So FTP, for example, secure FTP, SFTP uses SSL, for example. Yeah. Okay, and so this is just illustrating that if you think you have a tunnel to Concordia, but you really somehow ended up with a tunnel to the adversary's in the middle, they can read everything, they can modify it, they can read and modify. So these two properties basically get broken, not because the tunnel was bad, just because of where it ended was bad. Okay, so now let's go to the attack tree. So we want to do an attack tree for this. And as I've said, attack trees are for one attack on one system. So we're going to pick just one attack. We're not going to look at every possible way of breaking it. And we're going to focus on the first property, the confidentiality property. Okay, so the attack tree I want to develop is basically, I want to observe traffic sent over HTTPS from, this stands for man in the middle. So when there's an adversary in the middle, we say man, I don't know why man. Well, I know why, because someone invented it in the 1980s or 90s, and it's just stuck. But anyways, we'll say MITM. And so the important thing for this root node on that point is I'm going to assume you're already in the middle. Okay. Obviously, you have had to get in the middle somehow. I don't know how you did that. You could do an attack tree on that. That could be its own attack tree. Okay. But I'm going to assume you're already in the middle of the conversation. Okay. So the attacker is already here somehow. And now their goal is basically to read what Alice and Concordia are talking about from this position. Okay? What are all the possible ways that the adversary could figure out the conversation that's going on between these two servers? Okay? So that's the attack tree that I want to develop. And what we're going to do is we're going to split it into like sort of 3 categories of attacks. And then each category will have lots of attacks underneath it. Okay? The first thing that we'll talk about is what can you see? Let me just go back to the picture. The adversary does see stuff going back and forth. It's all scrambled up and they can't read it. Okay, but they are seeing scrambled up stuff go back and forth. Are we really so confident that they don't know anything about the conversation from seeing scrambled up stuff? Maybe you could infer some stuff, even if it's all scrambled up. Okay, so that will be the first set of attacks. So inspect from outside the tunnel or recover partial data from external observation. What we mean is they're not trying to break the tunnel. They're letting it go by and they're looking at it and they're seeing what they can see anyways. Okay, so there might be some attacks there. So we'll explore that kind of area. The second thing they're going to do is they're going to try and break into the tunnel. Okay, so the tunnel is protected with cryptography. So these are going to be a lot of cryptographic attacks. Okay, and then the third category is we're going to basically do this where the adversary is going to try and get the tunnel to end at them. Okay, so the user thinks they have a tunnel to Concordia, but the reality is they have a tunnel to the adversary. Then the adversary can inspect the traffic that's going by. Okay, so again, the 3 attacks are, attack 1 is what can we learn just by looking from outside the tunnel? 2, is there really no way that we can't break into the tunnel? Is the cryptography bulletproof, or is there ways that we could maybe break into the tunnel? And then the third thing is there a way to get the tunnel pointed at us? Then we don't have to break the crypto. It arrives in our laps, basically, all the data, and it's decrypted for us. Okay, so questions about the high level? Okay, so I think we're at a good place for a break. So let's go for 10 minutes, and then when we come back, we'll start with the first of these ones. Okay, we'll get started again. Okay, so we're going to start building our attack tree. And like I said, there's 3 kind of high-level nodes. So we're going to look from outside the tunnel. We'll try and break into the tunnel, and we'll try and get the tunnel pointed at us. So we'll start with the first one. Okay, so the sub-goal of this sort of branch of the tree is what can we learn, even if it's going over HTTPS? Okay, is there really nothing that we can learn? Okay, and for this branch of the tree, we're going to assume there's no flaws in HTTPS, there's no errors or anything wrong with the cryptography. It works perfectly correct. Okay, so is it actually as secure as advertised, or can the adversary still learn things? Okay, so let's walk through an example. So let's say I'm Alice and I want to go to concordia.ca. How do I get to concordia.ca? So what's the very first thing that I do? So I type in concordia.ca into my browser. I press the enter key. What's the first network packet that goes out on the internet, and where is it going to? Okay, so before I can go to concordia.ca, I'm going to assume I've never been there before. Okay, so my computer doesn't know Concordia University, I guess, is kind of famous, but it's not famous enough that every computer knows what it is. Okay, so it has to figure out where it's going. And in order to go places on the internet, Packets don't get routed based on names like Concordia.ca. Those names are actually just for us because they're easy to remember. Okay? On the internet, things get routed by numbers, just like a telephone number. Okay? So it's called an IP address. And so what I need to do is I need to get that IP address. I need to get that number for the server. If I have the number for the server, then I can go there. Where do I get the number from the server? Well, I get it from something called DNS. Okay, so DNS is just a big directory. It has every domain name that's ever been registered, and it has the IP address that corresponds to that domain name. Okay, so I'll go to DNS. I'll say I want to go to Concordia, and it will say, here's my IP address. Now, who is DNS? Like, who is that? Like, it's a thing that's out there, but like, who runs DNS?
Directory collection and services, or like a name record that's been posted or maintained by we call them registrars.
Okay, but who are the registrars then?
Server on their DNS.
Okay, so it is a server. They are running DNS, but like who in the world? Like, is it Google? Is it Concordia?
We have private, we have also like we have GoDaddy, we have there's a lot of registers out there, but actually there's a name register, but those are like sub-registers.
Okay. So one question is, it's not. We're not living in a world where there's one register. We're living in a world where there's a whole bunch. Yeah.
Local server?
Okay. So let's say there's a local server. What does that mean? Like, local means what?
Like Bell.
In-house, that's in-house, that's local.
It's the hierarchy, like .ca, .com.
Okay, so there is a hierarchy in terms of some people are authoritative over .com, some over .ca, but the DNS server that I'm going to, that Alice is going here, knows about .com, it knows about .ca. The only thing is, let's say it gets a brand new domain that it's never seen before, it has a way of asking someone else, okay? So it is a kind of network where you can ask other people about stuff you don't know about, and the person you ask for .ca and the person you ask for .com might differ. Yeah, so that's where that comes in. But the first person you ask, like you're the closest person to you in this whole DNS system, like I'm here at Concordia, is that it's a server, it's a machine. Is that like a Concordia machine? Is it Concordia's ISP's machine? Is it some machine for all Canadians that are on the internet everywhere? Is it for everyone who's on Videotron or Bell or whatever? Like who gives us that DNS? Okay. Okay. So I hear provider and Concordia, so they're both right. So basically it's given to you by whoever's giving you the internet. They basically will tell you where to go. Okay. So that's another question too, is how do I learn where my DNS? Like when I come to Concordia, my Concordia is my DNS. When I go home, Videotron's my DNS. How does my computer know that? Like I come to Concordia for the first time. How do I figure out where I'm going for DNS? So the answer is when you connect to Wi-Fi, it tells you. Okay, so it's one of the things that when you do that Wi-Fi connection, it's the thing that it tells you is basically tells you like where to send your packets, the gateway, and then it tells you where to get DNS from. Okay. Now let's say you want to change the DNS. I don't like Concordia's DNS. I want to use my own. Can I change it? So you can. Okay, so in your browser settings or in your operating system settings, you can go and you can change it. Okay, so and some people do it like parental control things might send it to like a special DNS that blocks a bunch of websites. If you ever want a DNS server for whatever reason, Google has one for free. It's 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4. Okay, pretty easy to remember. There's a lot of, it's sort of older technology, but there's a lot of situations where, let's say you go to a hotel or you're on an airplane or something like that, and they have internet and they want you to pay. Okay, so they're not going to connect you unless if you pay. The simplest technology, that's called a captive portal, is they just block DNS, right? So you actually have a full-fledged internet connection. The only thing is when you type in www.concordia.ca, it doesn't go anywhere because they don't hook you up to DNS until you pay. Okay, if you knew Concordia was at 132.205.244.70, you could type that into your address bar and go to Concordia. Okay, or if you have a DNS server and you know the IP address of the DNS server, then you could just get the DNS from them, and then you could use the internet without paying. Okay, so if you put in Google's DNS server, then you could get around all of that. Anyways, DNS will come back to. Okay, so in our attack tree, DNS is going to show up a couple times, but we'll leave it aside for now. It's just something that's given to you by your ISP. Usually, since your ISP is giving it to you, they run it, but they could point you anywhere in the world. It's up to them. That request is called DHCP. So sometimes you'll see that, like, I want to re-request my DHCP. It sort of like refreshes it. So you get basically the gateway and the DNS. Those are the key pieces of information. Let's say there's an adversary between you and DNS. Do they know you're going to concordia.ca? Okay, let's live in the world where the answer is yes. Okay, why? Actually, is there any world where that could be no? Is there any way that that could be a no? So the way it could be a no is if we have encryption, right? If we have a tunnel between us and DNS, right? Then the adversary wouldn't know. We agree? Okay. So, does DNS have a tunnel? It should. Agreed. It should. Does it?
It does because there's DNS spoofing. You can always correct the DNS record.
Okay, so DNS spoofing is an integrity issue. So remember, spoofing means changing things. Yeah? But we're talking about confidentiality.
Because it's contained records. So you can always tamper with the record.
Okay, let's say that every record is digitally signed. Then you have integrity. People couldn't change the records, but you don't have confidentiality. You can still, anyone can see the traffic. There's a signature that comes down with it as well. So that's called DNSSEC. So that is a thing. But the key thing is that DNSSEC does not provide confidentiality. It just signs records. It prevents DNS spoofing. That's its job. Yeah, but there's no confidentiality. There is an alternative called, I think they call it DNS over TLS, but there's a fancier name for it. That does provide confidentiality here, but basically no one uses it. So most DNS is not over HTTPS. Okay. So whoever your ISP knows every domain you're going just by looking at your DNS record. Yeah.
And even if it was HTTPS, like with the headers, the final IP is not encrypted because it's in the header.
So that's slightly different. So we'll get to that in a second, but just to answer your question, the thing that wouldn't be encrypted is DNS's own IP address, but the contents, like you're saying, give me Concordia's IP. It's sending you Concordia's IP. It's sending it to you in a message. So that's actually in the envelope. So it
Yes,
would.
But right after you would go there and it would appear.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah. So we can think about whether that's even useful or not. We'll get there. Yeah, next slide. But for now, yeah, no, DNS queries, generally speaking, are not going to be encrypted. So the adversaries could learn the domain, what domain you're visiting just by looking at your DNS. Okay. Now, you've answered the question already, but I'll ask it in case anyone didn't catch your answer or your question. Let's say that I got the IP address now. First off, like the IP address is hierarchical. So I'm like, I want to go to 132. So I tell Concordia's gateway that. It's kind of confusing because I'm on Concordia, going to Concordia, but I tell the gateway, and the gateway's like, okay, all the packets that are going to like this range, they go down this wire, and all the packets going down the other range go down the next wire, right? And then it goes to the next hop in the network, and then it literally has a bunch of wires, and it's like everything, if the middle number is between this and this, I send it down here or whatever, and that's how packets get where they're going, okay? So eventually it will get to the right physical server, which corresponds to this IP address. Okay. Now, does the adversary in the middle know that I'm going to concordia.ca?
That depends on the protection used in the network.
Okay, so Concordia.ca itself could be in the tunnel or outside of the tunnel.
If he knows the address.
Okay. Okay, so I guess there's conflating two things. One is like, does he know Concordia.ca? Does he know the address? Let's start with the address anyway. So actually, let me just set it aside. Concordia.ca is nowhere in this communication, okay? I asked DNS, I got an IP address. Now my communication consists solely of the IP address, okay? So Concordia.ca is nowhere to be seen anymore. We're only talking about an IP address, okay? And if the adversary were able to get the IP address, they could do what's called reverse DNS, right? And they can figure out the domain, okay? So they can figure out I'm going to Concordia.ca if they can get my IP address, okay? Now, here's the question I want to ask you. The adversary's outside of the tunnel. Is the IP address itself inside the tunnel, meaning the adversary can't access it? Or is it outside of the tunnel, meaning the adversary can access it? Okay, so some people say inside, some people say outside. All right, let's live in the world where it's inside. If it's inside the tunnel, that makes the most sense. I mean, you want to put as much stuff inside the tunnel. That's why it's there. It's there to protect your privacy, okay? There's only one problem with putting it in the inside of the tunnel, which is how do you figure out, how does the packet end up at the right IP address? If it's inside the tunnel, every router along the way can't read where the packet's going. They couldn't possibly send it to the right IP address. Okay? So the IP has to be on the outside of the tunnel. It's kind of like a mail, like if you mail someone, you can put whatever you want in the mailbox, or sorry, in the envelope, but you have to put their address on the outside of the envelope. If it's on the inside, then you can't mail it to the right person. Okay? So IP addresses are on the outside of the envelope. Lots and lots of stuff are on the inside. And we're going to play the game of, is that inside or outside as we kind of go through this. But IP address definitely on the outside of it. Okay? So the answer is yes, the adversary knows what domain you're visiting. Okay? Now, let's go back to the attack tree. You're in the middle and you're watching some user's traffic go by. You're trying to figure out what they're doing, but you can't figure it out because they're using HTTPS. Okay? In this case, you do know exactly what domain they're visiting. Okay? So that in and of itself is actually kind of a major leak of information, right? I can tell a lot from you, even if I don't know exactly what website you're on in the domain or what you're looking at, or you send a password to the domain, I don't know, but I just know that you're going to a particular domain. That could be enough, right? Enough information, depending on what the domain is, to make conclusions about you. Okay? So HTTPS does not protect you from that. Okay? So that's like actually a pretty glaring kind of shortcoming. You think, well, I have this secure tunnel. It doesn't matter if anyone's in the middle. Well, they at least know exactly what domains that you're going to. Okay, so a domain itself can be invasive in terms of privacy. Now let's think about let's go back to this question of what's inside the tunnel and what's outside the tunnel. So we established the IP address is outside and some stuff's going to be on the inside. So let's take a concrete example. So let's say I go to Wikipedia and I'm reading this page about our local soccer team, CF Montreal. Okay, so this web page is coming down to me over HTTPS inside the tunnel. Okay, so what that means is, there's a domain, we have this lock, we have all the content of the website, we have the fonts, and we have the pictures and all this stuff. So some of this stuff's going to be in the envelope, and sometimes it's going to be on the outside of the envelope. Okay, so the way it works is I'll go to DNS, I'll say give me Wikipedia's IP address. I'll go to Wikipedia and I'll request that page. Okay, so I'll say give me the page. By the way, this page is located at wiki/CF Montreal. That's where you're going to find it on the domain wikipedia.org. Okay, so the page I'm getting is wikipedia.org/wiki/CF Montreal/index.html, which is the page. And then that's going to be its response to me. So it's going to send me this HTML page. Then I'm going to load the HTML page. Okay, and it's going to have a bunch of HTML. You've probably seen it, and let's say there's a picture on the page, like say this logo here, okay? The way HTML works is the picture's not literally in HTML. Okay, I get this document and the picture isn't inside the HTML file itself. It could be. There are ways of encoding it, but basically never used. Okay? Instead, it's a link. So the HTML will tell my browser, hey, I want you to put this picture here. There's a space for it on the website, right? It's going to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and this is where the image is. It's not in this file. It's over on some other domain, upload.wikipedia.org. Okay? Then what I'll do is I'll actually go back to DNS. I didn't show it because upload.wikipedia.org is not identical to wikipedia.org. Okay? So any difference in domain could have a different IP address. So subdomains, this is called a subdomain. It could have a different IP address. So technically, I'll go back to DNS. I'll get upload.wikipedia.org's IP address. Then I'll say, okay, I'm looking for this like PNG file, which is an image file called logo. And upload will say, okay, no problem. I'll send it to you. Okay? And then I'll continue doing that. And eventually, I'll load the whole page. Okay? Now, I'm going to assume that the adversary, for our attack tree purposes, is on the wire of all of these communications. So they're seeing everything that's being sent. Here it's all going to Wikipedia, but you could be pulling images from Google or images from anywhere, right? So you could mash together a bunch of, these are called resources from different domains. There's no rule that says that every resource on a web page has to be loaded from the same domain, okay? All right, so what are all the resources that are on a page like the CF Montreal page? So let's actually just go there. If you want to see it, you might have to enable developer mode, but every major browser has this like inspect element kind of thing. It shows you a bunch, also everything you want to know. So this is the HTML of the page itself. It's actually the rendered version after it mashes everything together. But anyways, if you want to see that everything that comes down with this page, I'll go here and I'm just going to reload it. So it comes down pretty fast, but you can see, I know it's too small to read, that's why it's in the slides, but you can see that there's like hundreds of stuff on this page, okay? And if you go through it, you'll see some of it is JavaScript. There's style sheets, which sort of control the layout of the web page. There's a whole bunch of graphics, some more JavaScript. It's mostly graphics. The reason there's so many graphics is like each one of these is like its own graphic, and eventually there's all the players on the teams and there's all these flags, and these flags are all images, and so you have to download all the pictures of the flags and stuff like that. So anyway, you have hundreds of resources that are going into creating this page. If you loaded it and your internet was slow, like when I was growing up, you would actually like see the page and the images would come in later, kind of thing. So you would see it trickle in. Now it like happens mostly instantaneously. But that shows you that they're getting the images from a different server. Like they're getting the HTML first, your browser's actually rendering it, and then it's going out and fetching the images, and as it receives them, it's putting them into the page itself. Okay. Now, let's think about a few things here. Okay, so there's this Adidas short on black image.png that I'm getting, okay? So that's one of the images that I'm loaded, okay? And the place I'm getting it from is upload.wikimedia.org. There is a lock here, so the lock is indicating that I am fetching this resource over HTTPS, okay? So it's coming to me over HTTPS. If an adversary is in the middle, do they see that picture? Yes or no? So this picture is coming to me over HTTPS from this domain. Is the picture itself in the tunnel or is it outside of the tunnel? Okay, so it's going to be inside the tunnel. Okay, there's no need for it to be on the outside of the tunnel. My request to get this web page, that's a message, right? The fact that I'm getting something from upload.wikimedia.org, that can be on the outside of the tunnel. So the IP address of upload.wikimedia.org is on the outside of the envelope. But the exact file that I want can be inside the envelope. And then when it comes back, the picture itself can be on the inside of the envelope. Okay, so this is fine. What about the name of the file? The fact that I'm requesting that file, Would that be on the inside or the outside? Okay, it's going to be on the inside. You might think, well, how does the server then know which file I'm after? Sort of like, and so what's on the outside of the envelope is the IP address, which gets it to the server. So the packet is now at the server, but the server has the decryption key. So the tunnel ends at the server, so they can decrypt it, open the envelope, then they can pull the file name out. So when they receive the packet, they actually don't know what file I want, but then once they open it up, then they can see what the file is. Then they can go get the file, they can put it in an envelope and send it back to me. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'll just fast forward here a bit. Okay, so the name of the file and the file itself, that's going to be encrypted. Okay, the fact that I'm asking for something from upload.wikipedia.org, that is not encrypted. Okay, that would the IP address, and then you could do the reverse lookup of the IP address and get the domain name back. That is not going to be encrypted. Okay, so the adversary is able to see this. The type of file that I'm after, that's actually kind of part of the file name. Since they don't see the file name, they don't see the file itself, they don't really know what type of file I'm getting. So they don't know if I'm asking for an image or it's a JavaScript or anything like that. That's going to be protected. Okay, I had the answer on a screen before, but you also have the size, and then this is just the time of when I receive it. What about the size of the packet? Is that inside the tunnel or outside of the tunnel? In other words, if I download a little image or I download a big image, if you're outside of the tunnel, can you tell the difference? Yes, why?
The information itself is inside the envelope. However, because it's encrypted, generally, at least today, I don't know how it used to be, like encryption tends to be close to the actual size of the file, and that's for things like these, like images and things like that. So maybe he doesn't know that it's exactly 2.21 kilobytes, but approximately he can infer like the size of the thing.
Okay. So the suggestion here is that, so it's exactly right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what we call plain text. So I'm going to take the file unencrypted. I'm going to encrypt it, and that's going to result in the encrypted version, which is called the ciphertext. Okay, plain text to ciphertext. And so the key question is the ciphertext exactly the same length as the plain text? Okay, so you say yes, other people are saying no. So the people who say no, what's your rationale for saying no? Would it be bigger, smaller? How would it differ?
Hashing usually longer.
Okay, so this is encryption. Hashing's different. So yeah. Okay, bigger. Why?
Like the equation for the encryption itself, it makes it bigger.
Okay, so it could be possible that the encryption blows up the data somehow. Now, if it always blew it up, like say it always made it double, well, then you could look at the ciphertext and just divide it by 2 and then figure out what the plain text length is. Okay, so what we would need for this not to be true is I can't predict. If I have a plain text and I'm about to encrypt it, and I'm like, I have no idea how big the ciphertext is going to be. I'm just going to encrypt it, and maybe it'll be smaller, maybe it'll be big. I have no idea. Right? Is that true of encryption?
Yeah, it is because sometimes it depends. Even the computer you're using, it's a bit. It can be 8, it can be 16. So it depends on what the hardware even supports for it to do the encryption. So
Okay.
that one is even added to the encryption of the plain text. So it depends on how you want to.
Okay. So I'll give you the answer, and it's sort of a mix of what everyone said. Okay. If I start with a plain text, it is true that the ciphertext is more or less the same size as the plain text. Okay. So when I encrypt it, it doesn't pad it or make it bigger or make it like some crazy different size. We could do that. Okay. We could have encryption. We could have encryption where every ciphertext is always the same size. Doesn't matter if you encrypt a little bit or a lot, and it would be better for privacy for reasons that we'll get to in a second. The problem is it's bad for efficiency. Then you have huge ciphertext just for like little tiny data. So everybody wants the most efficient system possible. And so the most efficient thing is keep your ciphertext the same length as your plain text, or as close as you can get it. Okay. Now there's two types of encryption that you'll learn about in 6110. There's something called block ciphers. They're used a lot. AES is an example. It encrypts things block by block. So if your message doesn't fill up an entire block, then it will pad out the rest of the block. But a block is pretty small. It's like 256 bits. Okay, so it's not going to blow your ciphertext up. It'll just be slightly bigger. Okay, there's another thing that's called a stream cipher. So they're not used so much anymore. RC4 was one that was used for SSL for a long time, but now it's been discontinued. And they can round up to the nearest bit. You can get a ciphertext exactly the same size as the plain text. The way they're implemented in software, usually it rounds up to the nearest byte, but basically it's identical. Okay. Now, when you're talking about files that are, 2 kilobytes, right? The difference between plain text and ciphertext is small, right? It's only 256 bits, not even bytes, bits of that, right? And so it makes just a tiny minor, it adds a little bit of noise. So the truth is that if you looked at from the outside of the tunnel the size of the ciphertext that you see going by, you basically know the size of the things that the person's downloading. Okay. Now this is important. All right. So let's say that I go to this Wikipedia page for CF Montreal. Okay. The adversary knows I'm going to Wikipedia. Okay. That's on the outside of the tunnel, but they have no idea which article I'm looking at. Wikipedia has millions of articles about all sorts of things. Okay. So they have no idea which actual article I'm looking at. Okay. However, what they do see is they see, hey, I download some file from Wikipedia. It's probably index.html because it's always the first file. And then after I download it, I go and I ask for 87 different resources. Not 86, not 88, 87. Okay. Now, how many pages on Wikipedia have exactly 87 images as opposed to 86, as opposed to 88? It might be the only article that has that exact number of images. But let's say there's a couple that have the same number of images. Well, then what you can do is you can look at the size. So it's not just I'm downloading 86 images and they're all the same size. No, it's like some of them are small and some of them are big. And you can go to the articles and you can look at how many images does it have? What are the sizes of all the images? Some of them are little flags. Some of them are pictures of people and things like that. So there's a lot of variance in terms of it. And you can still see that even though it's encrypted. Okay? And you can also kind of see the order in which things are asked for. Okay? So like an image that's at the top of the article, will probably you ask for it before an image that's at the bottom of the article just because you're processing the HTML top to bottom. Now, computers are pretty fast, right? So it might not, it might not go out on the network exactly in order. There's also caching. So if I've been around Wikipedia, maybe some of the images I've seen on a previous page, so I have a copy of it on my computer, so I don't have to go out on the network and ask for it. Okay. So this isn't perfect. Okay. But what we have is we have a pretty good fingerprint of what it looks like to download the CF Montreal page on Wikipedia. Okay. It has a certain pattern, right? The pattern is essentially if you want to visualize it, you can sort of see this. Like you can see the size of things and kind of the order in which they come down and things like that, okay? So this makes a kind of visual pattern, and encryption doesn't hide that visual pattern, okay? So if you throw a machine learning algorithm on it and you say, go to every Wikipedia page, fingerprint what it looks like, and then I'm going to send you some network traffic and you have to guess which Wikipedia page the person visited, that algorithm is going to do pretty well, okay? It's going to get about 90% accuracy. Not perfect accuracy, but 90% accuracy, okay? And so this is a paper that tried to do that, and so they went to a bunch of different kinds of websites, and they were able to figure out what the user was looking at, even though it was over HTTPS. Okay? Yeah.
So would DNSSEC prevent this?
So DNSSEC won't. So all DNSSEC will do is it will make sure that you get the right IP address for the DNS itself. Yeah. So it protects between you and the DNS server, but it won't even touch this stuff at all. Okay, so HTTPS maybe doesn't seem so good anymore, right? We have this encryption algorithm. It's a secure tunnel. But what's the point of a secure tunnel if I can tell what you're looking at anyway 90% of the time, okay? But there's one big caveat with this attack, okay? The one thing that makes it not so useful in real life. And it's that the only reason that the person in the middle can tell I'm going to CF Montreal is because they went there first and they were able to fingerprint what it looks like. Then when I go, they can match the pattern of my traffic to the pattern that they fingerprinted, okay? So they had to go there first in order to recognize that when I go there, what I'm looking at, okay? Now, we call, like, when we think of all the websites in the world, there's a bunch of the web that's public where we can all go to the same website and we'll all see the same thing, okay? So all of these things that they measured on are part of the public web, meaning that everyone on the web can go there and look at the exact same thing. And so this fingerprinting works on the public web, okay? But most of the stuff you care about is on kind of a private web, which would be like your inbox in Gmail. The adversary can't go to your inbox in Gmail and fingerprint it, right? Because they can't log into your account, right? Or my banking information. Once I log into my account, that's my account information. The adversary can't go there first and fingerprint it. Okay, so these fingerprinting attacks do not work on anything that's behind a login screen. Okay, so you can't use this fingerprinting to figure out what your account balance is or who you got emails from yesterday or anything like that. Okay, you can use it for which Wikipedia article are you looking at or which public website are you visiting, even if it's over HTTPS. Okay, so this is still it's a powerful attack, but it does have bounds, and a lot of the things that we really, really care about, this attack doesn't work on. Okay, here's another question. Let me go back to this question. So here, I go to Wikipedia and it's over HTTPS. Okay, so that's fine. And then I go start loading images. Okay. And in our example, the images are also loaded over HTTPS. So you can see there's a lock on all the things that are being loaded on the page as well. But what if that weren't the case? Let's say you went to a website, you get the index.html over HTTPS. So you get that the first file comes to you over HTTPS. But the HTTPS instructs you to go get this image over HTTP from this server, and go get this JavaScript from this other server and this CSS file or whatever the resources are on the page, okay? So some of the resources on the page are coming down over HTTP. Some of them are coming down over HTTPS. Should they show you the lock to say that you're on HTTPS? Because when I see the lock, I think, well, that whole page that I'm looking at was loaded over HTTPS, right? But in this case, that's not the case, right? Some of the page was loaded and some of it wasn't, right? But if I don't show the lock, then it looks like HTTPS was used, at least for the main page that told me all the files to go and load. I did get over HTTPS, right? So that's better than not using any HTTPS, right? So it should show me something. So what do you think? What would you do? Your Google, your Safari, your Internet Explorer, whatever they call it these days, Edge. What do you show a lock or do you not show a lock if some of these resources come down over HTTPS and some of them don't? No. That's this. I found the security person in the room. So the security people say no. The usability people say yes.
I mean, it depends. As far as I know, it depends if it's a passive element or an active, like JavaScript or something like that. And some browsers show the lock if the element is a passive one, like an image. or I think Firefox showed like an in-between thing. I don't remember. But if it was JavaScript or any kind of active element, I think they wouldn't even load it, and also display a non-secure icon or something like that.
Okay, okay.
So it depends on the implementation, I think.
Okay, so that's absolutely correct. So the first thing is the browser is going to look at what is the thing that you're downloading. It's going to decide how important is it or not. Okay? If you're downloading an image and it doesn't come over HTTPS, what that means is an adversary could change that image. So when you load the website, the wrong image is sitting there. Okay, that's sort of the worst that can happen. And they decided that's not so bad. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the worst thing ever. Okay? Now, by contrast, let's say you're trying to download a piece of JavaScript. Once it hits your browser is going to start running it. And one thing we'll learn about JavaScript a little later in the class is if you get a bad malicious script running on a website, it can basically rewrite the whole website. Okay? So it's really, really important not to get malicious JavaScript running in the context of a website because it can replace everything that's on the website itself. Okay? So if you download JavaScript over HTTP, that's actually a very serious thing. Okay, so that could compromise. You shouldn't show the lock in that case because you can't trust anything that's on the page. If it's just an image, all it can do is whatever the website gives real estate to that image, that's all the adversary can control. But with JavaScript, they could rewrite the whole thing. CSS is sort of in the middle. That's the layout thing, but it's kind of powerful now. They have like scripting style elements in it, and so it's considered to be as bad as JavaScript as well. Okay, so things like images, audio, video, objects is considered passive content. Things like scripts, iframes, this is a way of JavaScript fetching resources and a bunch of other things. These are considered active content. And there's different icons depending on the browser. So Firefox was the example. So if everything comes down over HTTPS, then you'll get a lock that there's no question there. If you see a lock and there's a slash over it, it means that you're mixing content. So it's mixed content is the technical term for what's happening here. It means some of the stuff's coming over HTTP and some of it's coming over HTTPS. And I just have to read this to remind myself. Okay, and so if you have the slash through it, it means that you attempted HTTPS, but because active elements came down over HTTP, like JavaScript, you basically shouldn't trust the website at all. You should consider it as if it's loaded over HTTP. Okay, so a lock with a slash through it means basically it's garbage. Like it's as good as not having HTTPS. And then if you see a lock with like a little warning sign on it, it means you're kind of in the middle case where there were some images and things that came down, but they were passive content. So I am showing it to you. I'm giving you that little warning beside the lock saying that, not everything that's on this page was loaded securely. But the stuff that was loaded insecurely is not like the most dangerous stuff. It's not the JavaScript and the active content. It's just some passive content. Okay? And so I'll show you this. So these two are sort of mixed content. This is bad, and this is like kind of okay, medium. Okay. Now, the way most browsers work today is if you're ever in this case, now what they'll do instead is they'll just block. They won't let you load it. Okay. Active content that's insecure is too dangerous, and so they just won't let you load it. It will be as if you never asked for it in the first place. Okay, so it gets blocked. It will throw a warning, but it won't show up to the user. So the user is not going to see the warning, unless if you go into inspect element, then you can look at the log and see it. But in terms of just the normal human user interface, you're not going to know that there was an error. It just won't load it. And then if everything else is fine, then it will show you a lock because everything else came over. Everything that got loaded came over HTTPS, and then it will show you a lock. So there's a nice website if you want to play with this stuff. We'll look at it in a couple different. Let me just do this. So this is called badssl.com, and it has a bunch of websites that are set up that will trigger different kinds of errors. So if you want to see how a browser would behave under different types of errors, you can use this. So the kind of error, and you can see there's lots of errors, and we're going to talk about a bunch of them. But the error that we're talking about are mixed content. Okay, so let's say that I load a website that has a JavaScript in it that is not served over HTTPS. So you can see it still loads the page. You can see it still has a lock. This is in Safari. But what it did do is it blocked one of the resources, basically the JavaScript, and it didn't even load the JavaScript. So this is, sorry, I was looking at this JavaScript, but that's something that's coming from my extension. So it actually, so in the inspect element, it doesn't even show it to you, but it should show you an error that says that it was blocked. So it says it's too small to read, but it says the page at this URL, the URL that I'm at, it requested insecure content from something over HTTP that ends in JavaScript. This content was blocked and must be served over HTTPS. So that error message is registered in my browser. You would never see it unless if you were a developer, so you wouldn't know about it because it doesn't show up in the user interface. But because it was blocked and everything else was loaded securely, it still shows the lock. Sorry, I lost the question. Sorry, say again.
You know, essentially, I'm trying to verify all the contents on the website. I'm saying, can you also verify the direction of the website, or like the identity of the website? Maybe it's the URL.
Like do you mean the lock or the URL itself? Yeah. So save that question for next class. Yeah. So there is a way. There's HTTPS is supposed to do that for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, I can always register a domain name and put any malicious page on it. I mean,
Yeah.
domain name register is verified. I can always put it on the website online.
Okay. Save it. So you'll know all the answers to that question in another class. Yeah.
I have a question here. How does the browser verify that a passive element is indeed like an image, let's say, and it's not like poisoned or something to be like a script or I don't know something?
Okay, so that's a good question. So let's say I take JavaScript and I put it in a picture. So like byte for byte, it's JavaScript, but it has the extension .jpeg or whatever, and I send it down to the browser. So the answer is that the browser actually just looks at, so files have headers that say what type it is, and then there's the extension too. It probably doesn't even care about the extension, but it will look at the file headers. And if the file headers tell it it's a JPEG, even if it's not, it probably is not going to trick the browser because the browser will just try to display it as if it's a JPEG, and it will look crazy because it's not. But there's no risk of it actually running because the browser. Now, people play with those kinds of attacks where you send a file of one type, but it's a different type, and then once it's loaded into memory, you find a different execution path to get that to execute because it is going to put it into memory. So that is like the basis for certain kinds of attacks. But it's not as simple as just like writing JavaScript and calling it JPEG and sending it. It won't work, yeah.
Isn't it the same when you go into a malicious website and you get like an ad with no picture or nothing? Isn't it like the same as running scripts over like trying to get something out from
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, so if you have an ad that's on a website, generally what the website will do is it will put it inside what's called an iframe. And it is possible that you get a malicious script running in the iframe. And the property that the browser enforces is that everything inside the iframe, the script that's running in the iframe can do whatever it wants to everything else that's in the iframe, but it can't break out of the iframe into the main page itself. So this is why like people are happy to put ads on their website and allow the ad agencies to run JavaScript even though they don't trust them, is because they put them in an iframe, and the iframe's meant to enforce these properties. Yeah. Now, that's something we'll come back to later. Like the last two lectures will be exactly about that. So we'll come back to that too. So we're going to see passive and active content later when we talk about scripting, and we'll talk about browser policies and stuff like that. Okay. So anyways, the short end is that browsers don't like mixed content. If it's just a couple images, they might let it through. And if it's going to be like JavaScript, they'll definitely block it. And then the way they display it to the user might vary from browser to browser. Okay, so it's kind of happy, but not fully happy. And if you do a lot of really bad stuff on it, then it just will drop the lock. Okay, so anyway, that's mixed content. Now another attack that you could do is, again, you're outside of the tunnel. Okay. Because you're outside the tunnel, you're only getting ciphertext, okay? And we're going to assume that you can't break into that ciphertext today. Does that mean that in 10 years you won't be able to break into it? Maybe, right? What if we have quantum computers in 10 years or 20 years, right? Then could we break the ciphertext today? Let's assume for a second that you could, okay? Is that a value? I mean, who cares? It's traffic that was sent 20 years ago, right? Like say we have quantum computers today, and I have some HTTPS that I saved, from the 1990s. Who cares about stuff that was done in the 90s? Okay, so it depends on what it is. The government cares, right? And so the answer is that, like for a lot of things, you probably don't care. But for certain types of things like espionage or like, say it's like government officials talking to each other, things like that, and the adversary in this case is a nation state, they care a lot, okay? So let's say that you're the US government and you have an agency called the NSA, and the job of the NSA is basically break everyone else's communication and secure your own communication, right? What would you be doing knowing that maybe you're going to have a quantum computer in 10 or 20 years? You're probably going to build giant warehouses, right, of data warehouses where you can just store information, right? Now, we wouldn't know if that happened or not because it would be classified, okay? But we do know that they built this lovely facility in Utah because we can see it from satellite images, and no one can tell you for sure what it looks like, but it looks like a big server farm for storing information, okay? So I can't say for sure that that's what happens, but I mean, anyone who looks at it is going to put that guess together and tell you that that's probably what's happening. Okay, so they're storing everything that they can in hopes that maybe there's advancements in algorithms and things like that that will be able to break this stuff. Let's say you get a quantum computer. I don't expect you to know this answer, but I'll just ask it for fun. Let's say I get a quantum computer and I store all your HTTPS traffic today, and I have a quantum computer tomorrow. Could I actually read that traffic with a quantum computer?
Depends on how it's implemented. Like if the long-term keys encrypt the session keys, then you have no future secrecy. So you would break everything backward.
Okay. So the answer to rephrase is first off, it just depends on the crypto that you use. Okay. So we do have some crypto that is vulnerable to quantum computing that is used in TLS. Okay. So one of the things they're working on is a purely post-quantum TLS. Okay. So that's coming sometime soon. We don't have that today. So every TLS connection that you do, somewhere in that protocol will use cryptography that is vulnerable to quantum computing. Okay? Now, what that means is that if I have a quantum computer, I can break your communication. If I'm in the middle with a quantum computer, I can break your communication. Okay? But that's a slightly different question than could I break the stuff that I stored? Okay? If I'm in the middle, I'm able to change things. I can use my quantum computer to change things, and then I can like monkey with the connection basically in the middle, and I can get you set up in such a way that I can read everything, okay? But if someone's able to do the full handshake of the protocol, and I'm not in the middle with the quantum computer, but I am there with a recorder and I record it all, okay? Then I come later with a quantum computer, I can't break it. Okay, so there is this property called forward secrecy that now is enforced as of TLS 1.3. So it's not true of older versions of TLS, but the latest TLS, a quantum computer will let you break any communication that you can see with, like live. It will let you break live connections, but it won't let you break past connections, okay? Now, why are they storing it? Well, it's not just quantum computing, okay? There could be other weaknesses in the cryptography, and all crypto comes down to a key, and you can't guess the key because there's too many possibilities, but as computers get faster, they could potentially exhaustively search it, okay? So the algorithms that were in the very first version of SSL, I can now break on my laptop. Some of them. You know, there was like 56-bit keys, 40-bit keys, and things like that. You know, and so in another 50 years, even without quantum computing, classical computing might get fast enough to be able to break these things, okay? So that's probably why, yeah, nation states are interested in storing this information.
If this data center has a key to break everything, why they reveal that? They just storing everything.
Yeah, so they didn't come out and like have a press release that says it. It was more like people could infer it. That looks like what it is, and you can. It's hard to build a data center and keep it secret, right? Because construction trucks have to go in, and there's Google Images and things like that, and so I think they just were yeah. Anyways, it wasn't meant to be like a nation level secret, but at the same time, they're not like just telling everyone what they're doing. It's sort of in between. Yeah, so we don't know about all the server farms that are underground that the NSA also built.
I mean,
Or CSIS in Canada or whoever, yeah.
yes,
Or
my
CSE.
question is, basically, operating system or system is built to be forward and backward compatibility. That's why you have drivers, that's why you have middleware that they will communicate, or even if the system is like back, like maybe like Windows 98 era, you can still always use it. It's just that the driver will be an updated version. Now, when you say that for the records that are stored like in the past, maybe in the millennium time, is it recently that it was stopped for the TLS3 for them not to be able to go backward? Or, I mean, when was, because I know that for
Okay.
1 and 1.2, you can.
Right. Okay, so there's two great points here. So the first is, let me first say that this forward secrets property was, I think, always in TLS. So what TLS does is, now it's less true than it used to be, but when you used, like say TLS, SSL 3.0 or TLS 1.0, you actually had a lot of different choices. So there was a bunch of different crypto algorithms, and your browser would say, I support these ones. The server would say, I support these ones, and this is my preference. I would like to use forward secrecy if possible, but it depends on the configuration of the server. And the configuration of the server would depend on, for the most part, what were the defaults, right? You download Apache, you turn on TLS, and whatever the default was, most people wouldn't change it anyways, yeah? Okay, now backwards compatibility is a really important issue. So let's say that you fire up your Windows 95 machine and you go to Google. Could you actually go to Google? Because Google's now on TLS 1.3 and you're on SSL 3.0. But actually the answer is yes. Yeah.
If you can find the right DNS to go, that can pass the traffic of course to load Google, but not like maybe might not be secure in terms of your.
Yeah. You walk up to Google and say, "Hi, I only know SSL 3.0," and Google will be like, "That's kind of weird, but you know what, I remember SSL 3.0, like I still have the software for it. So if that's what you want to talk, that's on you. And it will talk SSL 3.0 for you, yeah? Now, let's say that all the things in SSL 3.0 are broken. They're not, but let's just assume for a case that they are, okay? Now, let's say that you fire up your iPhone. So you go to Google and you're like, hey, I want to talk TLS 1.3. But there's an adversary and they're in the middle. What do? They just flip 1.3 to 3.0. So you're like, hi, Google, I want to talk 1.3. The message is halfway to Google. The adversary intercepts it. They change that 1.3 to SSL 3.0. It goes off to Google. And Google's like, oh, that's weird. But fine, if you want to talk SSL 3.0, we will. Right? And then it comes back to you. And then the adversary flips it again and says, oh, Google's happy to talk 1.3 to you. Right? And so what you do is you end up with a 1.3 connection between you and the adversary and a 3.0 connection between the adversary and Google. Yeah? So this is called a downgrade attack. Okay? And we will talk about it next class. So that is one avenue or vector for it. And you might say, well, isn't that in the tunnel? But you don't have a tunnel yet, right? Like the reason you're deciding what protocol to use is to build the tunnel, so you don't have the tunnel to protect it. Yeah? So you have to do a handshake in the clear to get the tunnel, and anything that is happening in that handshake isn't over the tunnel, and it's subject to manipulation. Okay? So we need a way to basically handshake over an insecure channel, right, to make sure that we end up with a secure channel. So it's complicated, but we'll get there. Okay, so perfect forward secrecy says that basically if you steal some secrets, you can't break everything. I don't know. You don't have to know it more than that. Okay, so last thing, we'll just put this part of the tree into a tree. So we're sitting outside of the tunnel and we want to just see what we can see. Okay? And the answer is we can't. It's not like we can't see anything. We can actually see quite a bit, right? So any content that is mixed HTTP and HTTPS, anything that comes over HTTP, I can see, okay? So I can see mixed in HTTP content. I can see the DNS queries, and I can see the actual, like the outside of the envelope, which includes the IP address, which I can do reverse DNS on and get the domain, okay? So right away, I can see the domain that you're visiting, and I can see any content that's getting mixed in that's not HTTPS. If it's not going over HTTPS, I could also modify it. So I can read it and I can modify it. Modifying it won't let me see more unless if it's JavaScript. If it's JavaScript, then I can write a script that basically says, okay, read everything that's on this website, package it up, and send it to this IP address, which is my server. Okay? So if I can get malicious JavaScript loaded, I can see everything else that you loaded by just reading what's on the website because JavaScript's powerful. But no worries about that because the browsers will block it now if it doesn't come over HTTPS. Then I can do the fingerprinting attack. So I still see sizes of things and the number of resources that are being loaded in the rough timeline. And so I can infer what websites you're visiting if it's a public website. And then worst case scenario, if I can't do any of this stuff, or in addition to doing all of this stuff, I can just store it and break it later. But that's like a government attack. It's not like an everyday person kind of attack. Okay, so questions about any of this? Yeah.
My question is about Tor. If this data is flowing to the website and we are told.
Yeah.
Okay. And in Tor we have nodes there, forwarding packets to another node.
Yeah.
This tunnel are available, or this tunnel are sometimes something like a bridge, or I don't know what's happening on
Yeah.
Tor exactly.
Yeah.
Encryption or confidentiality is provided or not?
Okay, so it's not. So Tor protects its own Tor, like the process of setting up the server and choosing your route through. Tor has encryption to protect that information. So it protects like the middle node from knowing who's past the first node or who's after the third node. That's all Tor does. It doesn't try to protect anything else. Yeah. So every Tor node is actually this adversary, right? So you're purposely like choosing Tor nodes and giving them man in the middle position on your connection. Yeah. And then whether or not it goes over HTTPS depends actually on the website that you're visiting over Tor. So if you're on Tor and you're visiting an HTTPS site, inside of all the Tor stuff, you do have a tunnel that's end-to-end between you and the server. But if it's over HTTP, then Tor will protect it up to the exit node, but the exit node can see everything in plain text, and everyone between the exit node and the server can also do it as well. Yeah. Yeah. So the best thing is you need to layer Tor and HTTPS. They're complementary. Okay. Other questions or comments?
I have a question for taxis, not this one, like in general.
Yeah.
So we said that, again, in general, leaves that are closer together are kind of related, but does each leaf have a unique path, or is it possible to have multiple paths leading to the same leaf?
Okay, so there's no rules, I guess, about it. So attack trees are not like so well defined that there's like hard rules about how you make them and things like that. A lot of it is you do an attack tree to explain to someone else something. Yeah. And so if you think it aids in the explanation to do XYZ, you can do XYZ. Yeah. So if you have, if it's not a tree, if it's a graph where like different, like say this node leads to this node as well, if you think that enhances the readability, you can do it for sure. It's not typically done. What we'll actually see examples in the full attack tree where there are some leaves that are kind of the same as other leaves, but what we do is we just replicate them. So if there's two paths to the leaf, then there'll be two paths, and they'll have the same leaf node at the end, but you'll have the two paths to it. But you could visually, if you wanted to like have them merge at the same leaf and just write it once, you could do that as well. And so it would communicate different things to the reader. Like it would show that these two paths lead to the same place. Whereas if you just have the leaf and the text is the same, the reader might miss that, oh, there's a copy of this text somewhere else in the tree. Whereas by linking them together, you could visually show it. But then it might also be confusing, or it might be harder to read the graph because it would cross over other wires and things like that. So it's just sort of a trade-off between how readable you think it is with or without. Yeah. But in general, there's no rules about like it has to look like this or that.
What I mean is it's not like the evaluation frameworks that we did where we tried to, because there, for example, if you had something that's kind of the same thing, it would be better to cut it off and make it more readable. But here, you want to keep it as a tree, so you would do the same leaf 2 times, let's say, in order to make it more.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, if there are two paths to the same leaf, it's not like 2 columns in an evaluation framework. That indicates that you're measuring the same thing twice. Here, if you had the same path to the same leaf, I mean, it's pretty obvious that because in that case, it would just be like the same leaf off of the same path. It's pretty obvious, right? That you would prune it. But if the paths differ, then even if it ends up in the same leaf, then it's okay to replicate it, and it's not a duplication of the same data because the path is different. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like domain, well, actually you see it right here. So see how domain being visited is, so there's 2 ways to learn how the domain is being visited, right? You could do it by man in the middle lane, the DNS, or by just looking at the headers of the traffic, yeah? So these could be linked together. Now here, they're so close in the tree that it doesn't matter, but you could have that domain being visited some other subpart of the tree. That's like more where it would be a question of whether it's valuable to link them or not, but yeah. Okay, other questions about this? Okay, good. So we talked about the outside of the tunnel. Next class will break into the tunnel, and then the class after that will spend a lot of time on server authentication. And yeah, that's it.